A quiet town, a boy and his golden retriever, and one brutal afternoon that shattered everything. They beat his dog, hard, cruel, calculated. 11 years old, shaking with fear, he wrapped his arms around Cooper's broken body, while his attackers just walked away. But what they didn't know, his father wasn't just the sheriff, he was justice in uniform. What followed was a war fought not with guns, but with truth, loyalty, and the bark of a dog they called dangerous. What happened next will break your heart, and then heal it. Before we start, hit the like button, make sure you subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you never miss a story that still believes in good. The air in Red Ridge was sharper than usual that night. A cold front sweeping down from the northern hills had settled into the valley like a quiet warning. Street lamps flickered along the narrow roads, their light barely reaching the jagged shadows thrown by tall pines that lined every neighborhood. It was the kind of night where silence wrapped itself around every doorstep, broken only by the distant howl of wind and the occasional rustle of leaves. Inside a modest two-story house on Willow Creek Lane, 11-year-old Ben Harper was already in bed, cocooned under a blanket printed with faded constellations. Ben was a quiet child with a shy demeanor and an old soul tucked inside a small, slender frame. His eyes, a dark forest green, often drifted toward the past, especially when he looked at the photograph of his mother on his nightstand. She had passed 2 years ago in a car accident that still echoed through the corners of the house, and since then, Ben rarely smiled unless he was with one particular friend, Cooper. Cooper, a 4-year-old golden retriever with a thick, honey-colored coat and intelligent eyes that always seemed a few seconds ahead of any human, lay sprawled at the foot of Ben's bed. He was more than just a pet. Certified as an emotional support dog, Cooper had been trained to recognize signs of anxiety in children and adults. But with Ben, it was more than training, it was devotion. Cooper had slept next to Ben every night since the funeral. And tonight, like every night, he was still until he wasn't. It began with a low, guttural growl. Ben stirred but didn't wake. Cooper stood, ears perked, hackles slightly raised. He moved toward the back door downstairs with soft but deliberate steps, each paw placing silently on the hardwood floor. A moment later, the growl sharpened into a bark, a sharp, single note that cut through the stillness of the house. Sheriff Jack Harper, Ben's father, was already halfway down the stairs when the second bark came. Jack was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a graying buzz cut and a jaw carved from stone. His uniform hung on the coat rack, but the weight of law never left his posture. Years in law enforcement had given him a calm, measured voice and the kind of gaze that could pierce through lies like glass. But tonight, his eyes narrowed not with suspicion, but concern. He flicked on the backyard lights and opened the door. Cooper was standing just beyond the frame, growling toward the edge of the yard where the fence met the woods. Nothing moved. No raccoon, no fox, no breeze, just that heaviness in the air, like the sky was holding its breath. "Ben," Jack called, "get back to bed. Cooper just saw a squirrel or something." But something inside him knew that wasn't the truth. By morning, Red Ridge looked peaceful again. Sunlight stretched lazily over rooftops as if trying to warm the tension in the air. But when Ben stepped into the backyard to let Cooper out, he froze. Scrawled in angry, dripping red paint across the wooden fence were the words, "Dogs don't belong in Red Ridge." Each letter slashed like a wound. The color, dark and dried now, still held the violence of the hand that left it. Cooper sniffed the bottom of the fence and let out a soft whine. Jack was out in less than a minute. One glance at the fence and he was already pulling gloves on, inspecting the perimeter. He followed the paint drips to the far corner, where they suddenly disappeared. "Camera footage should catch it," he muttered, jaw tightening. But when he entered the security system's feed room, the monitors blinked with static. Every camera, every angle, offline. Jack's fingers hovered over the keys. A timed blackout. Someone knew how to cut the feed. Someone planned this. He stared at the words on the fence again and felt a deep sickness settle in his chest. This wasn't kids playing around. This was a message. Later that day, Ben sat in the art room at school, still shaken but quiet. He stared at a blank canvas, brushes untouched. His art teacher, Rebecca Lane, noticed. Miss Lane was in her mid-30s, with auburn hair tied in a loose braid and a soft, steady presence. She had a way of making even the quietest kids feel heard, perhaps because she had once been one of them. She had grown up with a stutter and spent years hiding behind sketchbooks before becoming the woman who now gently coaxed creativity from others. "You all right, Ben?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He didn't look up. "Someone hates my dog." Rebecca blinked. "What makes you say that?" He told her, just the facts, no drama, no tears. She listened closely. When he was done, she didn't say, "I'm sorry," or offer empty comfort. She simply said, "Then maybe you should draw him. There's a statewide art contest coming up next month. Theme is, The One Who Stands Beside You." Ben finally looked up. "Even if I don't win?" Rebecca smiled softly. "Some drawings aren't for winning. They're for remembering, for telling the truth when no one listens." He didn't answer, but his hand moved toward the pencil tray. That night, Cooper stayed closer to Ben than usual, curling his body protectively along the boy's side. Outside, the shadows in Red Ridge deepened, and though Jack checked the locks twice and reinforced the cameras, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been set in motion, and it had only just begun. The sky above Red Ridge glowed in bands of orange and rose, casting long shadows through the pine trees that surrounded Timber Creek Park. It was the kind of evening that made everything look softer, deceptively gentle. Parents pushed strollers along the path, an old man fed breadcrumbs to sparrows on a bench, and laughter echoed faintly from a swing set at the far end. But toward the back of the park, beyond the line of picnic tables and the rusted fence, the light dimmed earlier than the clock allowed, as if the sun knew something was about to go wrong. Ben Harper crouched beneath one of the dogwood trees that bordered the grassy field, a tennis ball in his hand. Cooper sat obediently in front of him, tail wagging, tongue lolling with anticipation. The tension from the night before had eased a little. The park, despite everything, was still their sanctuary. "Ready?" Ben grinned and tossed the ball with all the strength an 11-year-old could muster. Cooper bolted after it like golden lightning, his fur catching the last of the day's sun in soft halos. Ben laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. That's when the laughter stopped. From the thicket near the park's old maintenance shed, 3 figures emerged. Leading them was Derek Myers, a boy of 15 with a lean, sharp look about him. His jet-black hair fell in strands across his forehead, and his gray hoodie looked expensive but dirty, like someone trying to wear rebellion like a costume. Derek had grown up in the bigger house on Ashcroft Hill, son of real estate mogul Richard Myers, and had learned early that some people didn't get punished. Behind him were 2 of his usual shadows. One was Troy Baines, bulky and slow-moving, with a constant sneer that didn't match the confusion in his eyes. The other was Caleb Torres, wiry, with fingers always twitching as if he was wired too tight for his own skin. Both boys were a year older than Ben, and both knew how to follow orders, not question them. Ben saw them too late. "Nice dog," Derek called out casually, walking toward Cooper, who had just retrieved the ball and stood frozen with it still in his mouth. "He fetches, he guards, he barks at the wrong people. Impressive resume." Ben stood up slowly, heart beginning to pound. "Leave us alone." Derek smirked. "We were just talking. You got a problem with conversation?" Then came the sound, a crackling, buzzing hum. Caleb had pulled something from his pocket, a makeshift stun baton. Crude, probably modified from a cattle prod, wrapped in duct tape and malice. "No," Ben said sharply, stepping in front of Cooper, who growled low. "You're not touching him." But Caleb lunged forward too fast. The stun rod flashed once, and in a blink, it struck Cooper on the side. The golden dog let out a sound that was part yelp, part scream, and crumpled to the ground. "Cooper!" Ben cried, dropping to his knees. He reached to gather the dog into his arms, trembling with panic. Derek's eyes flicked sideways. "That's enough," he said, not to stop the violence but to stay out of sight. Then he shoved Ben backward. The boy's head struck a root sticking from the dirt, and everything blurred. Cooper twitched once, then fell still. They walked off without a word, melting into the shadows like smoke. 15 minutes passed before someone found them. Rebecca Lane was on her way back from the school after grabbing extra canvases for her art class. She liked walking through Timber Creek at sunset. It reminded her of the rare moments from her childhood that were quiet, when the yelling stopped and her father passed out drunk, and the only sound was the crickets. She wasn't expecting to see a boy and a dog collapsed in the dirt. Her breath caught. She ran. "Ben!" she shouted, kneeling down. He didn't respond, but his arms were wrapped tightly around Cooper's body. The dog's eyes were half open, unblinking. His chest rose barely. She gently placed 2 fingers on Ben's pulse, steady but slow. She grabbed her phone with the other hand, voice shaking as she called for help. "This is Rebecca Lane. I found a student, Ben Harper, and his support dog at Timber Creek Park. They've been hurt. I think it was an attack. Please send paramedics, now." Rebecca was normally composed, someone who spoke softly, never raised her voice, but her fingers were trembling as she brushed dirt from Ben's cheek. In her other life, before teaching, Rebecca had been engaged once, to a man in law enforcement who died during a robbery. That had changed her, made her more guarded, more observant. And now, as she looked at the scorched fur along Cooper's flank and the bruise rising on Ben's temple, she knew this wasn't an accident. When the paramedics arrived, she stood aside, arms crossed tightly over her chest. One of the EMTs, a short woman named Maya, knelt beside her and offered water. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "It's not me you should worry about." Elsewhere, across town, Sheriff Jack Harper was finishing his 3rd call of the evening when his phone buzzed. Caller ID, Rebecca Lane. He picked up on the first ring. Her voice was direct. "Jack, it's Ben. You need to come to Timber Creek Park, now." He didn't ask. He ran. By the time Jack arrived, the paramedics had already lifted Ben onto a stretcher. Cooper had been wrapped in a soft fleece and lay nearby, his breathing shallow but alive. Jack's face didn't change, but his eyes did. He knelt beside the boy. "I'm here, son." Ben's eyelids fluttered. "Dad, they hurt him." "Who? Ben?" The boy struggled. "Derek, and the others." Jack closed his hand around his son's. Rebecca stepped forward. "I already checked. No cameras back there, and they did it fast, in and out." Jack nodded slowly, then looked back at the tree line. His voice dropped into something colder than winter. "Then we make noise, and we make it loud." By mid-morning, the blue-gray skies above Red Ridge had turned a murky silver, casting a dull pallor over everything beneath it. The wind carried a bitter edge that slipped through the cracks in old shutters and made even the bravest dogs hesitate at open doors. Inside the Red Ridge Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Jack Harper stood in his office, arms crossed, eyes locked on the grainy printouts spread across his desk. Photos of Ben's injuries, a screenshot of the fencing where the red paint had long since dried, and now medical records showing the burns on Cooper's side. Jack's office was modest but ordered. Framed medals from his military days hung beside a certificate of service from the Utah State Police Academy. A faded picture of him holding Ben as a toddler, back when his wife was still alive, sat beside a stack of unfinished case files. But today, the only thing on his mind was justice. His deputy, Hank Mallory, leaned in the doorway. Hank was nearing retirement, broad-shouldered with a limp from a shattered knee back in '98 and a mustache that hadn't changed shape since the Reagan era. He was loyal, slow to anger, but had a habit of avoiding anything that smelled political. "You really gonna push this, Jack?" Hank asked, voice low. "I'm not asking," Jack said, grabbing his coat. "I'm filing for formal investigation. Assault of a minor and aggravated cruelty to an animal. You know who his daddy is?" Jack shot him a look that ended the conversation. He walked straight out the door. The mayor's office sat across from Red Ridge City Hall, a pale stone building with red-trimmed windows and a flagpole that whined when the wind pushed too hard. Mayor Calvin Deeks was a man of appearances. Early 60s, short white hair combed back like he was still running for office, which he always was. He wore fitted suits, deep navy or gray, with ties that matched the season. Deeks didn't believe in making enemies, but he also didn't believe in standing up to friends who made donations. Jack walked in without knocking. "I need a formal green light for an investigation," he said, dropping the manila folder on the mayor's polished desk. "I've got a child in the hospital and a dog nearly killed in public." Deeks didn't look up from his coffee. "I read the initial reports. Sounds like a behavioral problem." Jack's jaw clenched. Ben was ambushed. Cooper was shocked with a weapon. There's no camera footage, no eyewitnesses, and... Jack, he finally looked up, "You're talking about Derek Myers. His father is pushing millions into our infrastructure grant proposal. You want to put that at risk over a dogfight?" "It wasn't a fight. It was an attack." Deeks sighed, leaning back. "Take it to HOA if you want procedure. Let them evaluate the animal. They'll decide what happens next." Jack stared at him for a long second. "You mean Karen Westbrook?" Mayor Deeks smiled faintly, folding his hands. "Karen's very thorough." Jack didn't say what he wanted to. He just turned and left. Later that afternoon, a white envelope with a red HOA seal arrived at the Harper household. Inside was a formal notice. Pending behavioral review. Cooper was to be surrendered for observation at the Red Ridge Animal Behavior Facility within 48 hours. Signed, Karen Westbrook, Chairwoman, HOA Enforcement Division. Karen was a woman in her late 40s with a gym-sculpted frame, platinum hair cut to precision, and a voice as clipped as the rose hedges she micromanaged. She had moved to Red Ridge from the coast 6 years prior and quickly rose through the HOA ranks with the grace of a viper in designer heels. Her obsession with community standards was rooted in a past scandal, an embezzlement case involving her ex-husband that had nearly destroyed her name. Since then, she had rebuilt her life on a platform of control, order, and power behind closed doors. The moment Jack read the letter, he crushed it in his fist. Cooper, still recovering on the living room floor, raised his head weakly and looked at him. "You're not going anywhere," Jack said. Meanwhile, across town at Red Ridge Elementary, Rebecca Lane sat in the school's resource room, scrolling through the archives of the now-defunct Red Ridge Chronicle, the old local paper that had been shut down a year earlier under suspicious circumstances. It had taken her 2 hours and a VPN workaround just to reach the offline cache. She wasn't a journalist, but she was stubborn. After witnessing Ben and Cooper in that park, something had snapped. She couldn't shake the thought. This town had started hiding things. One article caught her attention. Land use debate. Myers Holdings seeks expansion. Conflict with HOA guidelines. She clicked. The article, dated 18 months prior, outlined a conflict between a local development company and HOA leadership. But what caught her eye was a paragraph at the bottom. Anonymous sources report that Karen Westbrook and Richard Myers have met privately on at least 3 occasions regarding development zoning flexibility. But the article cut off abruptly. The journalist's name was blacked out. She tried to access the rest, but the server rejected her. She screenshot what she could and emailed it to herself. Then she printed a copy and slipped it into her folder titled Red Ridge Truth. Before she left the room, she scrawled one sentence across the top. HOA isn't about lawns anymore. The wind had shifted in Red Ridge. It came from the north now, colder, heavier, dragging with it the scent of pine, diesel, and something sharper, like burnt plastic. Sheriff Jack Harper stood in the doorway of his kitchen, sipping black coffee as Cooper lay curled at Ben's feet beneath the table, breathing quietly. The dog's wounds were healing, but slowly, and there was a new tenseness in his posture, like he was always listening for footsteps that might not come. Ben hadn't said much since the park. He still went to school, still hugged his dad before bed, but his laughter had vanished completely. At night, Jack would often find the boy staring at the ceiling, Cooper nestled beside him like a sentinel. No one had come for the dog yet, but the 48-hour deadline from the HOA's behavioral review was approaching. Jack glanced at the security monitor by the fridge, 4 panels showing various angles around the house, still functional. For now. It was almost 2 a.m. when the garage exploded. The sound was a deep, metallic boom that shook the windows. Glass shattered. Car alarms from down the street wailed. Jack was up before his feet even hit the floor, gun in hand. He barreled down the stairs with the precision of a man trained for war. Ben screamed from upstairs. Cooper was already at the door, barking like his life depended on it. Flames poured through the cracks of the garage door, tongues of fire licking the siding of the house. Jack kicked the back door open and raced out into the smoke, shouting Ben's name. "I'm here!" Ben coughed from the side yard. "Cooper pulled me out!" The garage groaned above them, a high metal squeal. Jack grabbed Ben and pulled him farther away, just in time to see the roof collapse inward in a storm of sparks and twisted aluminum. The air stank of gasoline and scorched rubber. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the garage was a blackened skeleton. Jack stood with a blanket over Ben's shoulders, his face unreadable. Cooper sat beside them, singed but unhurt, though Jack noticed his right front paw was tender. Still, the dog hadn't left Ben's side, not even for a moment. Fire Chief Avery Lynn, a tall, broad woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair tied in a tight bun, approached him. She had a voice that always sounded slightly hoarse and eyes that rarely blinked. She'd been in Red Ridge longer than most, and though she wasn't one for small talk, she respected facts. "Accelerant," she said flatly, wiping soot from her cheek. "Smells like gasoline. Started low, near the left wheel well. Intentional." Jack nodded. "Arson?" "No doubt," she said. "Could have taken out half your house if that dog hadn't gotten him out." Ben looked up, eyes wide behind his soot-streaked face. "Someone tried to kill us." Jack didn't correct him. Later that morning, after the fire crews had packed up and the sun had crept reluctantly over the smog-stained horizon, Jack stood at the charred edge of what was once his garage. A melted tire rim stuck out from the rubble like a bone. He reached down to sift through a pile of ash and froze. Footprints. 2 sets. One larger, heavy-set boots, the other lighter, likely sneakers. Leading away from the back of the garage, through the pine needles, toward the road. He followed them in silence. That evening, as Jack stood outside cleaning soot from his hands, a quiet voice caught his attention. "I saw a car." Jack turned. Across the street stood Mr. Walter Gibbs, an elderly man with wispy gray hair and a slow, shuffling gait. He wore a flannel jacket too big for him and carried a plastic grocery bag. Gibbs had lived in Red Ridge for over 40 years. Most people thought of him as harmless but forgetful, a widower who talked to his plants more than his neighbors. But Jack had always known better. Gibbs noticed everything. "What kind of car?" Jack asked, keeping his voice steady. Gibbs looked around, then stepped closer, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, folded note. "I wrote the plate down. Habit. Saw it parked out here around 1:30. Never seen that car before. Tinted windows. Sounded like it needed a new muffler." Jack opened the note. A Utah license plate, 3ZK-2389. "Thank you," Jack said quietly. Gibbs nodded once. "Felt wrong, like it was hunting." Jack folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his wallet. He didn't sleep that night. In the morning, while Ben rested on the couch with Cooper curled at his side, Jack made a quiet call to a friend at the DMV's Special Records Unit. The vehicle came back registered to Everett Holdings, a shell company known for its construction equipment, but more importantly, known for being one of Richard Meyer's business fronts. Jack's stomach turned. At school, Rebecca Lane sat at her desk, grading papers as her email pinged. She opened it and saw a message from an anonymous account. The subject line simply read, "They won't stop." Inside was a single image, a photo of her parked car outside the school. On the windshield, someone had scribbled, "Keep out of it," in red lipstick. She glanced out the window, suddenly aware of how close the shadows seemed that day. The sun broke through Red Ridge like it was forcing itself to be seen, scattering light across the soot-stained siding of the Harper house. Days after the fire, the smell of burned wood still clung to the backyard like an unwanted guest. Jack stood beside what remained of the garage, boots crunching over glass and blackened timber, while Cooper lay nearby on a fleece mat, his bandaged paw stretched out as he watched Ben quietly. Ben sat cross-legged on the porch steps with a sketch pad in his lap, pencil darting across the page with a focus that hadn't been there since the attack. His brow furrowed slightly with each stroke. Jack had asked him once what he was drawing, but Ben only answered, "Something that makes sense." Jack hadn't pressed further. The boy had earned his silence. Back at Redridge Elementary, Rebecca Lane stood in the copy room, staring at a file she wasn't supposed to have. It had been slipped under her door in a plain brown envelope with no return address, sealed with nothing but a single red thumbprint. Inside were medical records for Cooper. At first glance, the document seemed legitimate. Stamped by the Redridge Animal Behavioral Council, signed by a Dr. Lauren Beckett, dated just 2 days after the park incident. The assessment claimed Cooper displayed reactive aggression, compulsive protection behavior, and, most jarringly, potential neuroinstability stemming from early trauma. But Rebecca had grown up the daughter of a veterinarian. Her father, a gruff, no-nonsense man from Montana, had drilled into her the importance of detail. If a record doesn't smell right, it probably wasn't raised right either. Something about the file's formatting, the generic language, the overly vague diagnosis, it didn't smell right. So she did what she always did. She researched. It took her less than an hour to find out Dr. Lauren Beckett had retired in 2019. The clinic address listed on the document was now a yoga studio. And the signature? It didn't match the archived copies from Beckett's published papers. It was fake. All of it. She printed every page, added her own notes in red pen, and slipped them into her Redridge Truth folder. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but the realization that this wasn't just negligence. It was orchestration. Meanwhile, Sheriff Jack had made his own discovery. The county zoning board had updated their development maps for Redridge the month prior. Jack, knowing the quiet war already happening behind closed doors, had requested a digital copy. When he overlaid the new zoning plan with the current neighborhood map, the pieces fell into place. The Harper house wasn't just a home, it was the epicenter. The planned redevelopment, named Project Evergreen, was a luxury eco-living complex that would span 4 blocks. And right at its heart was Jack's property. He leaned back in his office chair, fingers steepled. The garage fire hadn't been personal. It was strategic. Later that afternoon, Ben quietly approached Rebecca's desk after class. He held out a folded piece of paper. "Finished it," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca unfolded the paper and stared. It was a graphite sketch, clean and precise, almost too mature for an 11-year-old. Cooper stood atop a hill, his silhouette sharp against a crescent moon. His head was turned sideways, ears perked, eyes fixed on something just beyond the page. Behind him, faint outlines of rooftops stretched along the ridge, Redridge. Beneath the drawing, Ben had written in careful block letters, "He watches so I can sleep." Rebecca blinked twice before speaking. "Ben, this is beautiful." He shrugged. "It's just Cooper." "No," she said gently, "it's more than that." She waited until he left for recess, then scanned the drawing into her laptop and uploaded it to the submission portal for the statewide youth art showcase, under the theme, "The One Who Stands Beside You." She didn't ask Jack for permission. She didn't need it. Later that evening, she wrote an anonymous tip and attached the falsified vet records, along with her analysis, and sent it to the Morning Ledger, the only investigative news outlet still willing to take risks in their county. She signed it simply, R.L. Redridge. As night fell, Jack sat on the porch with Cooper at his feet. Ben stood behind them, holding a flashlight under the stars. "Dad?" the boy asked. "What happens when someone wants your house more than you do?" Jack looked out toward the darkened street, thinking of Karen Westbrook's signature, the fire, the doctored records, the silence from the mayor's office. He reached up and patted Ben's shoulder. Then you remind them it's not for sale. The morning in Redridge began with a hush too deep to trust. No bird song, no distant hum of leaf blowers, just the stillness of breath held too long. The sky was soft gray, the kind that made even the sun hesitate behind clouds. Jack Harper stood in his front hallway, jaw tight, one hand resting lightly on the butt of his sidearm. His other hand held a clipboard. The same clipboard delivered just after dawn with an official-looking seal in language that reeked of legality and threat. Authorized seizure of unregistered service animal. Compliance required. Stamped with the insignia of Redridge Animal Behavior Division, but Jack recognized the seal. It wasn't from the county. It had been printed locally, cheaply. Forged. Ben was upstairs, silent but alert. Cooper had sensed it before anyone, before the knock, before the trucks rolled up. He'd growled once, low and long, then dashed up the attic stairs with Ben close behind, tail brushing the wooden planks as they disappeared into the crawl space above the master bedroom. Outside, 3 men stood in matching dark uniforms, pressed with name tags, clipboards, and duffel bags. But their boots didn't match standard issue. The van they arrived in bore no government plate. One of them was young, mid-20s, pale, with slicked-back hair and mirrored sunglasses that didn't fit the early morning dimness. Another was heavy-set with a resting smirk and arms too muscular for a desk job. The third was tall, older, with graying temples and a military-style haircut. He did all the talking. "Sheriff Harper," he said, cool and practiced. "We're here to take custody of the dog per the HOA-issued behavioral review order. Please step aside." Jack didn't move. His voice came low and measured. "Show me your county credentials." The man lifted a laminated badge. Jack barely looked at it. "Fake," he said. "Issued from an inkjet. You boys want to come into my house, you'll need a real court order and a real badge. You bring neither, which means this is trespassing. Armed trespassing." The young one shifted his stance. The heavier man reached into his bag. Jack's stance shifted instantly, and the glint of his service weapon from his belt became visible. He didn't raise it, but he didn't need to. "I got a boy upstairs," Jack continued, stepping forward, "and a dog that saved his life. You're not laying a hand on either of them." For a moment, no one moved. The air was dense with tension. Then, slowly, the leader raised his hands in a mock gesture of peace. "We're just following protocol, Sheriff. Karen Westbrook signed off on this." Jack's eyes didn't blink. "Karen Westbrook doesn't outrank the Constitution. You've got 10 seconds to get off my property." There was a silent exchange between the 3. Then they turned, stepped off the porch, and walked back to the van. The heavy-set man spit in the grass before slamming the door. The van rolled away without its lights on. From the attic above, Ben peeked out through a vent slat. "They're gone," he whispered. Cooper didn't move, his ears still pinned back, every muscle in his body taut like a stretched bowstring. Downstairs, Jack exhaled for the first time in 5 minutes. He holstered his sidearm and locked the door. At that same moment, across town, Rebecca Lane stood in front of a mailbox just outside the Morning Ledger's regional drop station. Her hands were cold despite the gloves. In them, she held a manila envelope, thick, worn at the corners. Inside, the forged veterinary records, printouts of the zoning overlays Jack had given her, screenshots of the redacted article, and photos of the false seizure order she'd just received in her inbox that morning. At the top, she'd written one line in black Sharpie, "If I disappear, this is why." She slipped it inside the box and let the lid fall shut. Earlier that morning, Rebecca had received a knock on her apartment door. No name, no face, just a note slid under the door. Teachers should stick to crayons. She hadn't told anyone. Not yet. But the fire in her chest had flared hotter than fear. Back at the Harper house, Jack stood at the foot of the attic stairs waiting. Ben finally emerged, his face pale, eyes wary. "Dad? Were they going to hurt him?" Jack knelt down. "Not if I can help it." Ben glanced toward the window, watching the van disappear down Oak Ridge Lane. Do they know where else we go? Jack paused. They're watching everything now. Outside, Cooper finally let out a small, rumbling sigh and settled beside the front door like he was made of stone. The Red Ridge Community Center sat at the far end of Willow Lane, nestled between two manicured parks and the town's only bakery. Its brick walls, beige siding, and modest architecture gave it the look of a friendly, harmless building, but today it felt more like a courthouse wrapped in deception. Inside, rows of folding chairs lined the polished floor, all pointed toward a long table draped in green, behind which the HOA board sat like monarchs in a faux democracy. Karen Westbrook was already in her seat. Dressed in a tailored emerald blazer with a pearl brooch pinned at the collar, Karen looked every bit the woman in charge. Her platinum hair was curled to perfection, her expression unreadable. Her fingers tapped a rhythm against the table as she scanned the crowd. But behind the calm was a glimmer of something brittle. She hadn't expected this many people. The room was full. Residents who normally didn't attend these meetings now whispered in low voices, some holding phones ready to record, others simply watching. A local independent reporter, Lena Godfrey, stood near the exit with a handheld camera. Lena was in her early 30s, short and sharp-featured, with curly chestnut hair tied into a loose bun and a voice that cut through silence like a scalpel. She had once been a field journalist abroad, but after her brother died from bureaucratic negligence back home, she'd dedicated her life to exposing corruption in small towns, starting with her own. Sheriff Jack Harper stood in the aisle, arms crossed, eyes unmoving from the board. At his side was Ben, dressed in a clean white button-down, his hands clutching a folder with edges worn from constant holding. Cooper was lying at his feet, bandaged but alert, head resting on his front paws, golden fur, slightly dulled but still luminous under the ceiling lights. Karen cleared her throat. We'll begin. First, I'd like to remind everyone this is a procedural hearing, not a courtroom. Disruptions will not be tolerated. We are here to evaluate the behavior of an animal and determine whether it presents a risk to community safety. Jack's jaw tensed. Ben didn't blink. Karen continued. In accordance with HOA Regulation 8C, any unregistered or aggressive animal may be reviewed for removal. Mr. Harper has requested to make a public statement. We will allow it. She nodded toward Ben with theatrical generosity. The boy stepped forward. At first, his voice wavered. My name is Ben Harper. I'm 11. And this is Cooper. He placed a small, framed photo on the table, himself and Cooper sitting on the front porch with matching hats taken months before the attack. Some people in the room smiled. Ben took a shaky breath and opened the folder. This is a veterinary report signed by Dr. Elkins, our county vet from last week. It says Cooper is emotionally sound, not aggressive. He has never bitten anyone. He has PTSD, like I do, but he protects me. He's not dangerous. He's a hero. He pulled out another page, camera footage. This video is from our home security system, restored by my dad and his tech guy. It shows 3 people approaching our property the night our garage was burned. It shows them placing something by the wall, then flames, then Cooper dragging me out. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's expression didn't change, but her hands stopped tapping. Ben reached for the last page. And this is a page from my journal. He hesitated. I wrote it the day Cooper almost got taken. He read, voice cracking near the end. I heard the van door slam. I thought it was over. I thought Cooper would be gone. I've never felt more scared. Not even when the fire started. He's not just my dog. He's the only thing that makes me feel normal again. If they take him, they take my calm, and I don't know who I'll be without it. By the time Ben finished, there was only silence. Even Karen didn't speak. It was Lena who broke it, her camera still rolling. This is being live-streamed, she said clearly. Over 8,000 viewers now. They're asking to hear from the HOA board. Karen inhaled sharply. This is not a media spectacle, but her words were cut off by George Renner, one of the HOA members, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a perpetual air of fatigue. Usually quiet, George had served on the board for over a decade. He was known as a rubber stamper, someone who voted the way he was told to keep the peace. Today, he stood up. "I'm resigning," he said simply, voice low but firm. Karen's eyes widened. "George?" "No," he interrupted. "I've sat here for too long. We were told to sign papers, approve memos, all while being assured it was for community safety. But this is a child begging not to lose his best friend, and I've had enough." Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into murmured applause. Another board member, Linda Chen, a middle-aged woman with shoulder-length black hair and a gentle face, looked visibly shaken. She leaned into her mic. "We were pressured. The records, they were handed to us, already printed. We never saw vet signatures, just recommendations. I never thought to question them." Karen stood up suddenly, knocking her chair back. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped, voice tight with something very close to panic. Lena raised her camera. "Ma'am, the viewers would like to know who told you to file a seizure order without real authorization, and why was a fake animal control unit used?" Karen didn't answer. She walked out. Ben turned to his father. "Did we win?" Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet, but they blinked." As they stepped outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, quiet and thin, but steady. Cooper lifted his head into the air and let the cold touch his nose. Snow fell in slow spirals over Red Ridge like the sky was exhaling something long held in. The roads were quiet. The trees bowed slightly under the soft weight of winter, and the Harper household, once a target, now a symbol, stood firm against the morning chill. The news had broken just after dawn. Karen Westbrook was arrested at her home on Sycamore Hill. Footage played on every local channel. Karen, draped in a robe far less commanding than her emerald blazers, was led in cuffs down the stone steps of her immaculate porch. No pearl pin, no signature smirk. Her eyes darted from camera to camera as she was read her charges: fraud, falsification of public records, conspiracy to illegally seize property, and willful endangerment of a minor. The Red Ridge Project, Project Evergreen, as it was known in the planning documents, was officially frozen pending federal zoning review. Jack Harper watched it all from his porch with a mug of coffee and Cooper at his feet. The golden retriever had healed more than anyone thought possible. His gait was steady again, his coat shiny and brushed, his tail once more a proud flag swaying behind him. But his eyes had changed. Wiser. Older. Ben stepped outside in his winter jacket, holding a phone in one hand and a sealed letter in the other. "Dad," he said, half smiling. "They announced it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "The art contest. I won." He handed his father the letter. At the top, in large gold font, it read, "Statewide Youth Art Showcase. Winner announcement." Beneath it, Benjamin Harper, age 11. The Golden Watchdog. Jack smiled slowly, pride warming him better than the coffee. Later that afternoon, the entire town gathered in the Red Ridge Community Theater for the awards ceremony. It was the first time in months so many neighbors had willingly shared a space. The air buzzed, not with gossip this time, but with quiet anticipation. Ben stood backstage in a too-large dress shirt and a clip-on tie that kept sliding sideways. He fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve as Cooper sat beside him in a custom red service vest, now embroidered with gold thread that read, "Property of Benjamin Harper, Emotional Support Companion." Rebecca Lane stood near the curtain, offering an encouraging nod. She looked more relaxed than she had in weeks. No more anonymous letters, no more dead-eyed stares from HOA officials. Just relief and quiet vindication. The MC, a soft-spoken woman named Miriam Santos, head of the Regional Arts Council, called Ben's name. She was in her early 60s, short and broad-shouldered with curly gray hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. Her voice, however, was full of warmth and ceremony. Ben walked slowly to the podium, Cooper pacing faithfully beside him. Murmurs moved through the audience as phones lifted to capture the moment. The framed drawing was displayed behind him on a tall easel. Cooper, standing on a hill, silhouetted against a crescent moon, with the rooftops of Red Ridge behind him. Beneath the drawing, in gold lettering, the quote, "He watches so I can sleep." Ben cleared his throat. "Thank you for this award. I didn't draw Cooper to win. I drew him because I needed to remember who he really is." A pause. "There were people who tried to take him from me, who said he was dangerous, broken, or too much trouble. But Cooper isn't dangerous. He saved my life, more than once. He helps me breathe when I can't. He helps me sleep when the world feels too loud." He looked down at the golden head leaning against his leg. "And I think no one protects justice better than a dog who knows how to love." The applause was quiet at first, then swelled until it filled the theater like wind beneath wings. Even Jack, seated in the fourth row, felt his throat tighten. That evening, Ben and Cooper walked home from the community center along the main boulevard. Snow dusted the sidewalks like powdered sugar. Street lamps flickered on one by one. And at the entrance to the Red Ridge Meadows neighborhood, the very same HOA-run development that had once tried to tear them apart, stood the wrought iron gate. It was open, not just unlocked. Open. Swung wide as if in surrender. Ben stepped through it, Cooper matching him step for step. Some neighbors watched from their porches, faces neutral, others embarrassed. But no one spoke. No one dared. They didn't need to. Justice had already walked in. We don't choose where our story begins, but we do choose who walks beside us as it unfolds. For Ben, that choice came with golden fur, warm eyes, and a heart that never gave up. Cooper wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a healer, a reminder that even in a world that sometimes forgets how to be kind, love still knows its way home. Through smoke and silence, fear and fire, a boy and his dog rewrote the meaning of courage, together. They didn't just survive, they reminded a town of its soul. And maybe in your own quiet way you've got a Cooper too, a friend, a memory, a reason to keep believing. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that goodness still lives next door. Leave a comment, let us know what your golden guardian looks like. And don't forget to subscribe, because more stories like this are waiting. Until next time, may your home be warm, your heart be brave, and may God bless every soul watching this now.